Thank you. I was waiting for that. All right, that'll do. Welcome everyone to this meeting of the Nelson Regional Transport Committee. Welcome all our guests from NZTA and other places, and looking forward to going through what is quite a busy and full agenda today. I have, just a reminder that we are live streaming the meeting. I've got an apology from the Mayor for lateness, and yeah, potentially she might not make it at all, so moved by Gail, seconded by Paul. All in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Confirmation of order of business. I don't think we've got any changes to the order. Confirm that. Excellent. So now I'd like to welcome Mr. Laura Renshaw to Public Forum. If anybody has any interest, I trust that you've identified them already and will step away. If we could all turn our cell phones off, that'd be great. Mr. Renshaw is here to speak on what Nelson Transport could look like in a climate emergency. Speaking on behalf of NELSA, so you have 10 minutes to speak. We'll remind you to cover new material, please, and also to stick within that timeline, because we do have a very full agenda today. Mr. Renshaw.
Okay, thank you for allowing me to speak. So, firstly, I'd just like to set the scene as to the significance of transport emissions in New Zealand. And so, sorry for being a bit graph nerdy, but first graph here, cumulative emissions on the left with various things. And you can basically ignore the ones on the right. The one on the far right is forestry. And the one on the very left is agriculture, which we know about, which is about half our emissions. But the bit in the middle is what I want to focus on today, and that's transport is 20% of our emissions. But if you look at long-term emissions, it's actually 30%. So it's a big block. Oops, is it the next one? Sorry. Sure. These seem to be in the wrong order. I don't know how that happened. Sorry? Okay. Oh, here we go. Yeah, so just briefly, this is agriculture. So methane actually flatlined since 65, it gets a bit of a bad rap, but the actual methane hasn't actually done much for the last, since 1965. But it's nitrous oxide from agriculture that's done the big thing. I don't want to focus on that, but, and so just coming back to transport, so you can see here 20%. What's that made up of? It's almost all road transport. Domestic aviation, shipping, rail is all pretty much flatlined, but road transport has almost doubled. This is showing 70%, but it's a year out of date, and when you add the next year, it's actually 82% increase from 1990. And the surprising thing for me was finding out that the proportion of that in cars. So this is from MFE's emissions tracker, and on the left-hand side you can see the proportion of transport emissions from cars, quite huge, and the light-duty trucks, I suspect, is actually capturing some SUVs that people are using for school drop-offs and things. And heavy transport is not as big a emitter as you might think. and globally, how bad are our emissions? Well, they're pretty bad. This is per capita transport emissions, and we're right up there with fifth worst in OECDs. Yeah, it's quite a big thing. Oops. Sorry. So in summary, transport emissions really matter in New Zealand's emissions profile. They make 20% of our emissions, 30% of our long-lived ones, and they've been the biggest growth in emissions since 1990. So what can we do about it? The three things we've been banging on about for a long time, I won't bang on about today, but they all work for a low emissions economy. So what we'd like to see is Regional Transport Committee representatives on the Nelson Plan Preparation Group begging for the plan to allow more people to live close into Nelson City and to transport hubs, begging for the creation of it in the residential zones instead of sprawling out into peripheral farmland. Business as usual is encouraging suburbanisation of Mapua and people commuting daily from there. And look at all the problems, let alone emissions, that brings.
Peter, can I just interrupt for a second? I can't find China.
No. Yeah, it's interesting.
India. And Taiwan, I mean, I've been to China.
Are they in the OECD? I'm just showing what was in the Productivity Commission's low emissions economy graph. Now, I haven't... I don't think their per capita emissions are actually off the planet. Their total emissions are. But, yeah. It's okay. So, moving freight to the port without delays is a useful aim, as delays use more fuel. And if trades and delivery vehicles can move around the city without delays, that saves fuel as well. But we know that bald, untargeted increasing of roading capacity just leads to an increase in car use, and the congestion returns. We need to be more targeted than that. And we also know that there's a climate hit from road building. So how do we achieve this increase in efficiency without the climate hit from the cost of increasing capacity? Well, two ways: giving people more options than just car commuting, leaving more road space for trade vehicles, and secondly, incorporate trade vehicle and express bus clearway lanes so that these vehicles can be more efficient. EVs offer a significant emission saving, however, they do nothing for road congestion. That is, unless the EV you're talking about is not taking up road space. The most successful New Zealand EV is not even counted as an EV, it's an e-bike. Many of the people who have tried them have found them transformational. They end up being using them far more than they expected to zip around town. So when we talk about promoting the use of EVs, what we should be doing is, in particular, two-wheeled EVs, and I'm not talking about Lime scooters. So in this climate emergency, shouldn't we be making it easy for people to get to work, schooling and recreation, easy not just in the car? Or should we be doing more than that? Should we be doing what the Netherlands has been doing, actually make it easier on active and public transport modes? Shouldn't you actually be doing everything in your power to make car commuting relatively less attractive? That's the bullet I'm asking you to bite today. Cheers.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Ollerenshaw? Councillor Noonan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for coming in. I was sitting here thinking, in a lot of ways you're right. So I was trying to work out regarding the 1990 to the 2016 comparison, and of course we've had a population increase, but so I was asking my colleague here to work it out. So we've had a 45% increase in population, but that takes us a bit of the way. So, but it's the bit above the blue line that you're probably worried about. We've grown out of the average, but some people are going to struggle getting out of a single car transport. So do you have a sense of how many people you could encourage from a vehicle? I mean, my big beef is really the getting to and from work, because the cars come in and they park all day and then they sit there all day and then they go back. So those are the ones I would sort of be looking at getting. Are those the ones that you're trying to encourage out of their cars and into public transport?
Yes, public transport and active transport, but also living like you do, more locally, rather than commuting from
Which is a
Mapua.
great idea, but we've got flood problems.
Yes, we do on some of our land, but there's still plenty of land that's relatively high.
So the ones that we can get out, so there'll still be some that live out further. So have you got any suggestions of how we can help get more people on the bus to commute?
One good way would be to have buses.
Enough buses?
No buses. We don't
Regular
have buses like from Mapua,
Right.
from Wakefield,
Yep.
from Brightwater. So a lot of the traffic that's coming to Nelson is actually sourced elsewhere. It's not actually Nelson traffic. And all the option I've got is just a bus from Richmond, and that's not an express bus. It just winds around the roads slower than a car.
Yep. I think that's right. I agree with you. So buses are expensive, unfortunately, through the chair. Any suggestions on that front?
It would be good to have them a lot cheaper. I'm not sure if the funding assistance rate, the fare box recovery rate is set to change further, but we were ahead of the ball with our fare box recovery for the Nelson Richmond buses. Ahead of what the NZTA standards were. I think we're at 60 and their standard was 50. I'm not sure if that's changed, but so fares could come down and still comply with NZTA guidelines.
All right, thank you. That's all we've got time for today, so unless there are any other pressing matters from committee members at this point. No, okay. Thank you, Mr. Reinschel. Welcome, Madam Mayor. Right, my chair's report is a verbal one. Firstly, I would like to acknowledge the upheaval at NZTA at the moment. Certainly appreciate that it can't be an easy time for you guys, and so we certainly appreciate all the hard work that you're doing on our behalf, particularly in keeping projects like the Nelson Future Access moving forward. Just did want to acknowledge that. Thank you also for agreeing to the Adify speed review in the expedited program. I think that was a really positive decision to have that brought forward, and certainly off the back of some really strong community feedback. If you're in a position today to update us on the timing for that, that would certainly be much appreciated. Also note that the Waimea Road speed reduction has gone very smoothly. So well done to all involved from council staff end. I think it's been a really good rollout of that speed reduction, and also to the people of Nelson for adapting to it so quickly. Personal experience is it feels a lot safer and easier getting in and out of the Ridgeway now, whether that be on 4 wheels or 2. It's great to see some progress and clarity on the Nelson Future Access project. A lot of people have across our city very interested in this project, and it is indeed critical to the future of our city. So the fact that we've announcing an important step today and giving a bit of clarity about the program going forward is really encouraging. There is, I guess, a bit of a disappointment that I am going to take the opportunity to express today, and that is the way that the TFAR program has rolled out. For those of you who don't know, we have now been told that TFAR, the cupboards are bare on that front, and there won't be any more money coming in off the back of that program. I certainly acknowledge that it was put in place quickly to try and respond to a direction from central government, but it did result in a huge amount of work coming out of this council. Certainly the hours that Alec and Marg and team put in to try and respond to the change in direction of the GPS, and to put up projects that would align with the GPS and would meet the TFAR funding requirements was just massive, and I thank you for that work. We also, by putting those projects up, set some expectations in our community about projects that were likely to be progressing. So it is quite disappointing to now hear that there isn't, central government have not made enough money available to progress those programs of work, and we're having to now be told that those things are not going to progress, that many people were looking forward to seeing. One example of that is the loss here of the Atawai and Wakatu noise reduction resurfacing programs. So that was to see an investment of about $5 million into our region, and certainly a subject that many people have come in and submitted to and asked for, and it finally looked like it was going to happen. But that, along with a number of other things in the active transport space, are now not proceeding at the same speed, and it also looks unlikely that we'd be able to get any movements in the public transport space, even though there's a desire to move there. And I guess all that comes on the back of today. We are now having another fuel tax increase, as well as road user charges going up. And as I sit here and sort of coming to the end of the first term of council and seeing the production of, overseeing the production of the first RLTP that I've been involved with, it does give me concern that we are seeing more and more money being taken out of Nelson, and perhaps not seeing the same level of investment that we should rightly expect to come back in, and is absolutely necessary to keep our city moving forward. I can't accept that Nelsonians are being asked to pick up the tab for really big ticket projects in the main metros, while our own transport outcomes are getting worse. And I think we're going to see some monitoring data today that pretty clearly shows that. So I guess that's a challenge back and to through NZTA and back to the ministry, that provincial and rural New Zealand, and that was certainly a hot topic at a recent South Island RTC Chairs teleconference that I was involved in. Rural and provincial New Zealand needs to be acknowledged, that the needs of our regions from a transport for safety and access and livability can't fall by the wayside just because there are some big calls being made in Auckland and Wellington. So, that is my chair's report. Are there any questions, Madam Mayor?
No questions as such, as I'm happy to move the acceptance of your report.
Thank you.
I'll second it.
And seconded, Councillor Matheson. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Sorry, I missed that, but sure.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Just picking up on your comment in your report, and I appreciate I'm not a member of the committee, so I do appreciate being able to ask a question. I was just wondering about Waimea Road and the changes to the speed limit and behaviour. Is there any suggestion that the changes had an impact on traffic flows and or congestion?
Too early to tell.
Okay. Alec doesn't have a view?
Through the chair, the question was raised, I think, at the council meeting, and we said that we would bring some data back to council at the appropriate time, but it is too early to tell.
Oops, sorry, I apologise. I've just seen that I missed confirmation of minutes, so we'll go back and do those now.
I'm happy to move.
So we'll go any questions or corrections first. Councillor Noonan?
I think page 11, Mr Chair, it says right at the bottom there that where the resolution is, it's got Noonan and Harland at the beginning, which is a bit unusual, but then we've got Noonan and Matheson at the end actually moving it, so I'm not quite sure what happened there. I'd say the first bit probably needs... It's just the way, maybe it's just the way that it was written. It's usually at the end rather than the beginning. But I'm sure that's a minor amendment that can be fixed. I also have two questions arising out of the minutes, so do you want to do that afterwards? Or do you want to do the questions before they're raised?
We don't usually take questions off minutes, do we? So we don't. The minutes aren't an opportunity to ask questions.
Some chairs allow it, some don't. I just wondered whether we can have an update on some of the things, because I can't recall them being sent out, so I was just going to query them.
Are they NZTA matters?
One of them was on page 13 where Mr Palmer was going to, well, there was the last question, the last sentence, a decision would be made in early May if a consultation was required. And I don't know whether that's been
I
required
have
or not.
every confidence that all of those matters will be covered off in the reports that NZTA
Mr. Palmer's here.
bring us today.
Okay, that's...
I hold any questions that relate to NZTA for their reports.
And the other one was regarding something Mr Levertis was going to send, and I can't recall it, but we do get a lot of information. So that was the next sentence, was regarding the delegations. They were going to be sent out, and I don't recall whether they were or not. Second to last.
Yep, Mr Levertis.
Through the chair, I did action that, and I sent that through to the governance group as requested.
Oh,
So
okay.
the governance group have
And
got
I'm not
those
on that,
copies.
that's
yes.
fine. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Matheson, seconded by the Mayor. All those in favour? Aye, against, carried. Okay, we move to item 7, which is the NZTA report.
So through the chair, it's a covering report, but Mr. Steve Higgs will be here answering his report is attached, so is the 8-to-1 speed?
Yes.
Sorry, you're raising that button now?
Yes.
Oh.
Welcome, Mr Higgs, and I'll get you to introduce.
Janine Foster.
Welcome, Janine.
Apologies, so is this to do with the variation, or it's?
No, sorry, Margaret, can you provide a report to Steve? If we could just maybe take an adjournment for...
Sure, so we'll just, quick adjournment, but for everyone's information, it's page 17.
Okay, so this was the update.
Okay, no need for an adjournment,
I'm fine.
you're fine, thank you.
Jim, Sorry, just to explain, so this is an NZTA update of one of which the report. So what I might do is I might go through the report, and if it's okay for the committee, We do have a brief PowerPoint presentation to just quickly go through too, it's really just to provide a general update from NZTA.
Sorry, Steve, have you got that presentation for us?
It's a hard copy presentation.
Oh,
Yeah.
we can hand it up.
Okay, we'll just take a short adjournment. Everyone can collect materials required and we'll come back in a minute.
Then Mr. Higgs and Janine will follow through with the specifics for the variation. You've already touched on some of these matters in your introduction, and we thank you for your support for the agency during this challenging time. And the first point there is that we have been looking at the NLTP funding that's available for the remainder of the term. And as you're aware, members will be aware that we wrote to all the local authorities identifying which items are funded, which ones are likely to be funded, and which ones are unlikely to be funded. And that's been followed up with face-to-face meetings throughout the regions of New Zealand to enter into a dialogue for that understanding. And we thank you for your patience on that. The other matter, which I think we've touched on briefly before, is that the agency is working on a 10-year picture as it sees the challenges before us. Once we've done our thinking, we'll then bring that to the table for further conversation, and the idea is that that is one of the inputs into the next NLTP, because we want to get to that in rather early, and then we need to link that obviously with the funding that's available for the remainder of this period, but also the next period. I think some members may be aware as well, page 4, ultimately we use an investment assessment framework to evaluate all projects and programs.
That's my page 4.
It's not the same as my page 4. Well, you share this one.
Jim's got a different, Jim's got
The
some,
PowerPoint.
should we all have one of these?
Oh, you've got 2 on 1. Okay. Yep, okay. So if I just use yours for page references, it's the third, it's the slide called investment decision making. Sorry, page 2 and yours 4 and mine. We have to treat the State Highway and the NZTA investment program exactly the same as we have to treat anyone else's program. We have a legal requirement under the Land Transport Management Act to do that. It's called the scrutiny principle, so that if any third party looks in, they can see we're treating ourselves exactly the same way as you're treating yourselves. And that's a recognition that, you know, about half of the expenditure goes to local government and half is retained by ourselves, but more importantly, about half of the transport undertaken on the networks is on local networks and half is on state highways. So it's very much a partnership. But that investment decision-making framework is the tool that we use to then translate the government's policy signals into practice, and that's where you get your ratings. And obviously with the shift in the emphasis to safety, placemaking, access, environment and value for money as opposed to economic productivity, safety and value for money, we're having to rearrange that investment framework because it's not fit for purpose. There has been technical workshops held through New Zealand to look at that.
later this year, there will be a draft framework that comes out for people to have a look at as well. So that's quite important because it needs to reflect, everyone's views. And it will provide guidance around business cases as well as ultimately investment decisions through RLTPs and then the National Land Transport Program. So that's a very important framework. Speed management, Janine will talk about that in more depth. You're aware that's a top priority. And you'll also be aware that recently the government's announced they're looking seriously at Vision Zero, which acknowledges as humans we make mistakes, but we should have a system which doesn't mean that you die or get seriously injured when you make a mistake. In my thinking, that also applies to other networks such as footpaths and cycling networks. They need to be set up so that users are safe. And as we're seeing with the introduction of mobility scooters, which are electrically powered, they're operating on networks which were not specifically designed for their needs, and we're trying to find the best way to accommodate them. But you've also got skateboards and a whole lot of other sort of mobility devices which are using footpaths as well as roadways. So I think we've all got a bit of a challenge around that one as we go forward. And again, I'll leave Janine to talk about the speed review decisions, but essentially we're targeting the top 10% of areas at risk. We are doing that by way of regional priority, and it's in sort of the third year for us. We will be focusing on Nelson in particular. The last slide just talks about this focus around livable cities or livable places. Transport is an enabler for people to go about their lives, and we need to recognise that when we're planning for networks. And you've already got good examples such as your main street, which is prioritising most modes equally as best you can, whereas 20, 30 years ago it would have been just asphalt without upraised areas for pedestrians. There wouldn't have been that shared space at the end by the cathedral. So quite a lot of this has been going on, but we've now got an explicit requirement to do more in that space. So that's the high-level overview. So perhaps Mr. Hicks and Janine can now.
Thank you. I think we'll just take a couple of questions if anyone's got some. I do have a couple of questions off the back of this. The working together piece, one of the challenges that I think we all face, and it seems to be a bit of a theme, is that everyone creates their RLTPs and then it sort of goes off into a black box in Wellington and comes back with things that we really often didn't expect and didn't seem to align with what was in the RLTP, even when a huge amount of effort went into that storytelling, that working with the GPS. Is there any streams of work going on at the moment to perhaps better align the RLTP and the NLTP process? And is there a way of us at this level getting more visibility into that process so we can perhaps put things up that are more likely to be successful and not get our hopes up and our community's hopes up with things that aren't going to make it?
That's been a common theme through all of the sessions that we've had recently, and the Ministry of Transport earlier on, as part of their preliminary work into the next GPS, has also had the same feedback. So the agency and the ministry will be putting some serious thought into how we can do that. There's, as I understand it, there's a commitment to, as soon as possible, get the signals to everybody earlier than we normally do. The other thing linked to that is the size of the pot. So, realistically, how much money is likely to be available in the different activity classes? The sooner that signal is available and what proportion might be needed in different parts of New Zealand, the easier it is to try and align regional plans with the likely availability of funding. And that's where the investment assessment framework is also important, because some regional transport committees use their own prioritisation system, and that's sometimes works and is aligned with ours, sometimes it isn't. So if we're able to run the same prioritisation system, then you should be able to put your regional transport program in a priority format which you know has got a reasonable chance of being funded, as opposed to being quite different to where the funding is going to land based on that assessment framework, which is why I'm stressing it. So the messages have been heard. The challenge for the agency and the ministry is to come up with a program which is going to allow the production of the next RLTPs to be more starting at a higher level, with a more realistic expectation of funding, as well as some sense of priority, which we've all agreed before it gets to Wellington.
Thank you. Under the title of speed management, point 2 says that a reduction in speed is the most cost-effective way. Does that cost-effective measure, does that account for lost time to do tasks if speed limits are reduced? So is that a full picture cost, or is that just the implementation cost?
I think, Janine might correct me if I'm wrong, I think that's relating to the safety aspects of the system, not the productivity aspects. The simplest way to ensure there would be essentially virtually no deaths and serious injuries would probably be to drop all speeds through the entire network to about 30 kilometres an hour. Now, obviously and the reason for that is because when you hit a human at that speed with most vehicles, they've got a very high chance of survival. But from an efficiency, economic productivity, product to market, all those sorts of things, you can imagine it would be quite challenging for some industries to operate. So, but in terms of for investments which we know will work, side barriers, median barriers, those kind of things are very cost effective. Do you want to add anything more to add?
No.
No, I think you summed it up properly. So correctly. So it really is the cost of implementation. So rather than putting in costly infrastructure, for example, and putting in costly engineering solutions, speed management is something that once you've got through the process, you can put in reasonably cheaply. Well, a lot cheaper than through engineering.
Okay, so it's looking at speed quite an isolated. Okay, thank you. And just the last bit from me, and then Councillor Matheson, the last point on the Streets for People, which certainly aligns well with a public forum presentation that we had last week on this subject. Can you just put a little more meat on the bones there of how quickly we could start looking at some of these things, and if we did have a street or two in mind locally with some willing residents that we could get on and give some of these things a bit of a trial, or is this sort of a nice idea but it's down the track a bit?
Can we perhaps come back to you? I think what would be useful from our point of view would be to find out a bit more about what is intended through this program, and perhaps we can formally come back to this committee.
I think the other point linked to that is how you monetize non-safety efficiency benefits, which, in order to, and that comes back to that investment assessment framework, how do you ensure you can capture the benefits of having a nice place, which also is a place where you can travel safely through it as a walker, a cyclist, and a vehicle. And we're obviously putting factors into that framework which we didn't used to. So there may be an opportunity to pick a couple of streets in Nelson and do that as a pilot to test the framework. So we'll see if that's possible.
Okay, I certainly think there'd be interest here if that was, but if you could come back to us, that'd be much appreciated. Councillor Matheson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've got 3 questions for you guys. On page 1 of here, where you're talking about working together, I see you're indicating that you're looking at a 10-year plan. Do you expect us to have a 10-year plan as well? The reason I ask you that is that we get changes of government and anything is possible. So could you like to comment?
The RLTP does have a 10-year focus and a 3-year funding horizon, so that's good. I think one of the points you're making, which is, again, this is a personal view that I think we need to get stronger at, is with all of the investments we've already made in the system, there's a high proportion of this future money is already spent maintaining current footpaths, current cycleways, current roadways, and just normal rehabilitation, reseals, maintenance. So it's been clear about how much discretionary funding we've got over that 10-year period, because as governments come and go, there's a certain base level of funding just as you need for running your own city. And it's been clearer about what does that look like, so that the opportunity every 3 years is to reset the discretionary side while maintaining the system. And when you look across the GPS activity classes, it's not always obvious what that looks like. So I think, as a minimum, we need to think out 10 years, but in reality, a lot of the assets we build last 50, 100 years, and they're fundamental building blocks for every community. So there's a question there which is more of a political question about the alignment of the funding planning system to the...
Because you'd have to confess it gets very frustrating from our point of view when you do a 10-year plan with 3-year reviews and suddenly nothing aligns with nothing. And we look and think, why did they change the rules? So we were just talking about the changes to the economy this morning and suggesting we did annually we looked to see whether we're still on the same track, which actually has some merit, even if it's just to run something over the top of it and say, yes, we're not off the rails together, because sometimes you're governed by the central government effectively more than we are. We sort of come in after you. And I remember for years, we used to have a National Land Transport Program which you produced, and then we started to align ours with you. But if we go first, it doesn't work anymore. So I think if you just consider looking on an annual basis just to see that we're both on the same track would be helpful.
Good observations, and the interim chief executive made it clear at the various workshops that he attended, and I did as well for the ones that I was looking after, that we are going to look every quarter at how the expenditure is panning out compared to what we expected, and be as dynamic as we can about it, readjusting priorities when that comes up.
Okay,
the other point that was made very strongly, which every 3 years there is a new national government elected.
A new government.
And the Minister of Transport, on behalf of that government, whether it be National, Labour or Coalition, it's just national in the sense of the overarching system here, they then determine through the government policy statement how much freedom to give the agency as their delivery arm. So if they wish to see more public transport, then they give us a greater band to play with there. If they want to see less state highway investment, they give us less money there. If they want to see more or less maintenance and so on. So they go through the activity classes and back that up with some very clear signals in terms of objectives and policies which sit in that document. The agency has to give effect to that. So the board and its planning through the NLTP and working with the RLTPs, but the first cab off the rank is the RLTP, which then builds to the national program. And board member Vanessa Van Uden made it very clear to elected representatives that when she was a mayor, she perhaps didn't pay enough attention to the GPS settings, because that's the political input to this, the pot for the different areas.
Yep.
So, that's something which, obviously you can do, which at the end of the day, I'm there just to help deliver it to those policy settings.
The last question I've got is regarding speed management, and I don't argue with what we're trying to do in that area, but there's an economic cost to the regions when you do that. I think you'll understand that we don't have a rail here, so it certainly prevails upon us a little bit more than most, because we need an efficient and very speedy type system for our freight and so forth. I don't know what the cost is if you reduce the speed, but did you guys do any work on that? The economic cost to a region for... just as a matter of interest, Waimea Road, I went over today, was running very well indeed.
I can't answer that, but in terms of the process that NZTA would be going through to look at whatever solution, what the solutions that it would be coming up with, it would need to go through a cost-benefit analysis. Part of it would be, costs associated obviously with safety benefits that you would get, and costs obviously in terms of the running of the network.
Okay, I'll just give you an example which is probably unique to us, and that is the port company. Our freight is determined by the rise and fall, and so very often we have to get a lot of product to the port company in a hurry to ensure we meet those, because of the size of the ships and the flow. That would be a good example to say if hypothetically you're going to reduce the the surrounding streets that lead into Rocks Road, for example, would come in from Atafwai. What effect would that have if they have to do that? The economic effect could be quite substantial if they don't meet those ships who don't hang around.
Yeah, travel time saving, reliability of journeys, safety, they all go into the cost benefit mix. So if there was a change to a network which significantly impacted on travel time to a port, that would come up as a negative benefit, and it would flow through in terms of the overall picture and equation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Excellent. All right, so we'll get into the details of the Atawai speed review. So page 7.
I'll just take you through at a broad level the contents that are actually in the report itself. So on page 19 of the agenda, just to highlight to the committee that we have now agreed to look at Atawai as part of State Highway 6 from Nelson through to Blenheim for a speed management review. That is actually underway at the moment. We have already looked at a technical assessment. So the process from here, and correct me if I'm wrong, Janine, but the process from here is that we will undertake a technical assessment, and then there will be a process to get final approval, and then we would go out for consultation.
That's absolutely correct. So the review itself, the technical assessment for the review is due in today by close of play, at which time we'll then go through and approve that to begin our stakeholder engagement program, which I anticipate will begin in the next 2 months, most likely earlier than that. I will be working in the top of the south on behalf of the agency with the system managers and with the safety engineers to ensure that you have the most up-to-date information as soon as possible. Bearing in mind I'm now 7 weeks into my role, so I'm very quickly coming up to speed on it.
Very good. So you'd expect to be able to let us know what your recommended outcome would be this calendar year then?
Absolutely. We would be hoping to look for implementation by the end of this calendar year.
And, okay, and funding for implementation, there's money there, or does that have to go back through
So that's
an LTP process or anything like that?
So that's the second part that's connected to this is that we have actually got a variation for speed management review, implementation of the speed management guide. So this is part of the Nelson program. I guess the way to describe it is that this part of the program has been fast-tracked, and the rest of the program will be delivered in the next year and a half.
Can you just help me out here a little bit? The variation, if I've got it right, was for the entire Nelson State Highway network, whereas this bit was the Atawai to Blenheim. That's a different project, aren't they?
So the Atawai to Blenheim has fallen out of the SAFE network. So that was the corridor work that we have done. We've just been out for consultation on. Obviously, the very clear steer from the community was that appropriate speeds was was something that they needed to tackle first. That was the significant issue. So we are doing that work, but that work will be run as part of the safer speed part of that project of that program.
So to give context, the Safe Network program is much larger than speed. There are 3 different components to it that on their own in isolation are not as strong as working together. So we're looking at state highways, we're looking at local roads in partnership with yourselves, and we're looking at speed. Speed is the most effective way to get immediate safety benefit on the roads, and the community has been very clear in Atawai there's a significant issue there, and it's been prioritised and brought forward. A more holistic regional speed management approach will be discussed in the coming months as an opportunity to work at a regional level.
Okay, thank you for that. And I guess we're coming off the back of the noise reduction project. We are still in a position here where, despite all the will in the world, this is not funded. And so today we're being asked to put it into as a variation to the RLTP, but then it could still go up to NLTP and get told no, there's no money or there's other priorities.
Can I just, through you, Mr. Chair, just confirm with the team, for the speed reduction proposals from Atterfai to Nelson, my understanding is that there is funding for that, assuming it goes through the system, whereas the bigger picture questions, which are some of those other components you mentioned, they are subject to, national consideration.
It has been approved as a priority by the board.
So just to answer the other question, Mr. Chairman, with any project that is included in the Regional Land Transport Plan, it always it needs to go through a business case, obviously, to ensure that it is a robust project. Every project will need to go through that test. So this work will be no different.
Thank you. So you want to move that we receive the report, Councillor Nolan? And seconded by Councillor Masson. So all those in favour of receiving the report? Aye. Against? Carried. So further questions. I'll come to the Mayor first and then come to Councillor Barker second.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thank you for, I'm just reconciling that we're dealing with item 7, but it's going to come back potentially under item 12. And
Yes, that's correct, Madam Mayor. It is slightly confusing. There's two different processes going on that are quite linked.
Right, so we're just dealing with item 7 at the moment, which is essentially the acknowledgement that the letter's been received and a review is supported. And what I'm hearing is from Janine is that that's going to come forward, so you're going to deal with Atawhai before you deal with the bigger picture.
Absolutely.
Right.
So we're looking at corridors.
Okay. So at this stage, the Atawhai is just the speed element, so that's what you're bringing forward, and you've got your technical reviews just about finished. And are our staff going to know what the outcomes of that is before it goes out for public consultation?
Absolutely.
All right, okay.
Give me a couple of weeks.
Thank you, thank you. And then we'll make sure that, and the RTC would be aware of that, therefore, what's proposed, just so that we can be as supportive as we can be in terms of what's there. And I want to thank you very much for the swiftness with which that was picked up. Really appreciative of that. Thank you. And then the bigger picture discussions around the state highway management I'll address when we get to item 12. That's okay.
Councillor Barker?
Thank you. I need a bit of help on page 21 under the business case approach. The second paragraph of that section, business case approach, and the second sentence is what I'm having trouble comprehending and what it means. I'll read it. This means that approximately about 55% of all council capital improvements, as well as road safety promotion and all core programs, e.g. public transport, road maintenance and operations that are supported by an activity management plan or regional public transport plan without more business case activity required. Well, there seems to be something missing. What's the consequence? This will mean what?
I think that's a national statement for first point. The second point is it's saying if you've got that program in the RLTP and in your normal plan, and it's in your activity plan, because the threshold is now $1 million before you trigger a business case, in New Zealand's context, about 55% of programs don't need to go through the formal drama of a full business case because you've already done the work through your activity plans and so on, and we're comfortable with that. Now, that's how I read it. Mr. Hicks may have a different view. No.
No, that's right. I'm sorry. I'm just reading it as you read it out too. But that's exactly right. So a full business case approach really applies to the larger projects that are capital projects. So what we try and do is, as much as possible, go through that business case process at the very start. So the projects that end up falling out of it, we should be able to just get on and deliver those projects.
So it should speed up decision making and less time in the planning.
Right. Thank you.
All All right, no further questions on that item for now? Nope, okay. So we've received that update, thank you for that. And moving on now to the next item, which is the update on the South Island Visitor Flows project. Who's catching that one? Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this committee contributes some money to the regional chairs projects, one of which is the South Island Visitor Flows project. The first stage of this work has been completed, and essentially it's identified the need for some more work. And there is some funding required for the next stage of that work. So my understanding is that the project stalled a little bit while that funding was sought, and Mr. Harland may be able to add, I'm not sure, since I last wrote this report, whether that has been progressed.
Sorry, I can't enlighten you any further. Yes, Mr. Hicks has got some more knowledge.
So through the chair, my understanding from the officers that have been working on this in Southland or Otago is that the first stage is complete, the second stage is yet to come, and it will happen. It just, we don't have a lot more that we can say at this stage.
Councillor Noonan?
So I guess we're stuck by funding, and until we get it, we're not going to go any further, but you'll just keep us updated. Is that how it's going to work?
Yes, through the chair. So I think it's written in the report, brief as it is, that there is the next stage that's going to look at breakdowns of a better spread across the regions of visitors, the tourism's benefits, so we can cope with forecasts, what the infrastructure looks like to accommodate those forecasts, and some thoughts around the journey and not just the destination. But that is the next stage of work, and we will keep you up to date.
Come to the table if you could, Steve.
Sorry, that was, so there is quite a bit of conversation that's occurring in the background. There is active discussion between the Otago Regional Council, Otago Southland, who are leading this work, and NZTA, and we're pretty confident we've got some funding for it, but I'd actually need to go back and just confirm that has actually happened. But there have been active conversations about how that work would be progressed.
Is that something you could update us on for the next meeting, if there's been some progress and we can get a bit of a better steer about where this might be heading and some milestones and timelines?
Yeah, I'd expect so, and the purpose of this work is that there was some initial work that was done around some of the data sources that you might actually use to try and develop a model. This is really now getting down to trying to see if we can use some of that data to develop, to actually progress that model.
Thank you. Councillor Matheson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can I just go to 3.2, Steve, where it says the work is now complete and is published through the NZTA, understand current da-da-da-da. What do you mean by that?
So that was actually the first part of the work was actually done as a research project through the NZTA. It was fully funded by NZTA as such.
Yeah.
So that's now been complete. It is actually, it should be on the website. You should be able to get that as a public document.
What's it tell us?
Basically, it tells you that. So what it looked at was a number of different data sources. So there's a lot of data out there actually about how tourists get into New Zealand and then travel around, and you can use either through payments or accommodation booking, that sort of thing.
Yep.
So a lot of that work was actually looking at how useful that information was. What would it tell you and what wouldn't it tell you? And then it came up with some scenarios about the sorts of data that you might actually use in order to track tourists, to track tourist movements.
Do you know, I don't know where you went for your sources of information, but I would have thought something like our regional development guys who handle our tourism flow and accommodation things would be helpful.
Well, we had accommodation providers, we had Paymark, for example, that were looking after credit cards. It was that sort of information that the airports would actually hold, rental car companies. So there's quite a myriad of different information sources.
So I think to answer your question, what it's shown, and Steve's answers have confirmed it, is that it's very difficult to get a source of the truth where you can reliably say that's where people are coming from, going to, this is how long they're staying, this is how much they spend, this is the transport they use between Nelson and, say, the West Coast and so on. Because there are different data sets, but it's difficult. They've all got limitations. And
well, actually, no, that's not correct, Jim. I think all of us would know that I would say I'm pretty confident that if it's land transport, when they arrive in the South Island, they have two choices. One of the difficult ones is turning right and starting their journey here. The most common one is to go down through Kaikoura, Christchurch and south. And we know that because when Kaikoura had its earthquake, we got this huge influx of some 16,000 freedom campers coming through here because they had no choice. So that told us how important that route was over and above turning right and starting their journey here. And I think that's been well documented for a long time. I think the point we're making in this visitor flow project is what sort of effect are these visitors having on our infrastructure, which is far more important to us by numbers, etc., than which way they're going to go. I think we've got a pretty good handle on that one. But the important part is, and we found that when we ended up with all these freedom campers, that we suddenly turned our car parks into refugee camps, to quote the locals. And we didn't have the infrastructure for that, but that was a once-off. So I just think through the years that we've been watching this business, that we've got a fairly good idea where people go, unless there is a really strong reason why not to change their habits. I think it's the effect on that journey that we want to know about.
Jim and Steve, am I right in saying we've got a fair idea about what's happening, but the information sources are quite disjointed still, and there's not that one integrated picture of where people are going, how they're getting there, what time they're spending, and that's hopefully what the next stages of this project might enlighten us on.
Agreed, and I think the point that Councillor Matheson's made is the right one in terms of, well, so what? And it is about knowing the journeys, it is about knowing about what additional pressure is going to come on it, it is about understanding the nature of the markets and what they may be looking for, because Chinese people are looking for different things to West German people and so on, and what does that mean for safety improvements, pull-off areas for photographs, et cetera, because we need to respond to that. And if it means more pressure on overloaded facilities, well, we've all got an interest, because that means we'll degrade the quality of the New Zealand experience, so we'll have less people next year. So it is intended to be used to identify at a regional level those critical interregional journeys. Is the route up for standard? And if you then combine that with the government's desire to see more dispersal of visitor value, then what does that mean for some of the local roads that are taking you to perhaps less discovered but soon to be discovered natural attractions in parts of the city, or Nelson Tasman generally. So we need to be deliberate about that rather than just reacting. So that's where we hope to get to with some of the next phase of the project.
Councillor Barker?
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I wonder if, are you the person I should ask questions of as to the policy of the Regional Transport South Island Chairs Group? Because reading the report, that's the group that's recommending a consultant be appointed in the second 3.2 of the report on page 23. And looking at what 4.1.2, one of the aims, I take it then, is to have better infrastructure to deal with the forecasted numbers of tourists. Is the Chairs Group suggesting that central government or someone is going to help the regions with this infrastructure, whether it be in the ground infrastructure to deal with the tourist numbers, or whether it be above ground infrastructure? What's the Chairs Group plan in this?
I've only been to one of the 4 meetings of the RTC, South Island RTC Chairs Group, where this was discussed, but it was still, I guess the steps that you're seeing in 3, that initial piece of work wasn't yet ready, and so these next steps now weren't discussed at that point. We spent a lot more time talking about the sister project to this, which was the freight project. So in terms of where this goes, I think that is and particularly if there's a funding question, and perhaps, Steve, you're saying that that funding might be solved by central government and therefore not come back to the Chairs Group for approval, but in which case the project can just carry on. Otherwise, I suppose there'll have to be a decision from all South Island chairs coming up.
I take it then funded out of that $10,000 per annum that we've got, and all the equivalent fundings of the other South Island.
That would be right,
Council
yes.
committees, is
Yeah,
that right?
Yeah.
So you'll keep us up to date?
Absolutely, and that's what this is today. Is the first time that we've had meaningful information to come back to, that the project might have some legs and might have another stage. We did just get back, but I think it really come through on Friday, so it hasn't been digested yet, so we're not going to discuss it today because we wouldn't be able to really. The South Island freight project has just come back, but I think that'll be a subject of probably an update at the next RTC meeting as opposed to this one, given the timing of this. But I guess, Councillor Barker, to answer your other question of is the infrastructure that goes alongside of the way people move around, and if you're talking about complementary facilities like place to go to the loo, yes, that has been discussed, and I think it's the pretty well-aligned view of the South Island chairs that all those matters actually come as a package, and you get regions much more impacted than our own with those matters, and they're certainly getting pushed up all the time. That it's not good for anyone to bring a whole lot of people to a place and then just dump them in an area with no suitable facilities to deal with that number of people. Right, so I'll move that we receive the report, seconded by the Mayor. Thank you. And sorry, another question before? Yep.
No, just
right,
speak briefly. I just having actually a bit of a scan through that document, and there's certainly a wealth of lot of different data sets, and how you bring it all together and come up with a strategic approach is a bit interesting. But one thing I would say is that the regions that have got data are going to be advanced in terms of investment, and so they should be. So the message for our region is make sure that we've got the data to build into business cases that we can actually hold our position in terms of this and really get the alignment between what our tourism strategy is really clearly. Obviously, we don't have the access to rail, and I can just see the impact there of the ferry and what that does along different routes. Clearly, Queenstown is a major destination in terms of tourism, along with Christchurch Airport, and so there is a desire for there to be dispersal of tourism numbers throughout the South Island, and we're going to have to really make sure that we have got draw cards that will get the tourists here. So you've got to think about what is the package and actually making sure that we account for that so that we can maintain our case. I would just sort of perhaps look at this in this context of a change in growth patterns. So what we know from Tourism New Zealand is that things are softening, and we need to be mindful of that and just be really reflective of who is our tourism market, and is it going to be impacted more or less by the factors that are causing the overall softening and growth around tourism to New Zealand. I think we're already starting to see some international impacts around long-haul flights, and when you think about having to take a long-haul flight, which country is pretty seriously impacted by some of our major tourism destinations, then it's New Zealand, and I think we need to be really mindful of what that will look like. Already in some countries you're seeing a reduction in air travel and a preference for land-based travel, so just think in terms of those choices. Tourism New Zealand and New Zealand are all watching that and saying, those very, very high growth curves that we saw over the last decade are starting to soften off, and we just need to be very careful thinking about how does that softening impact our region, because we could go from having good sustained growth, which we value from an economic development perspective, to actually fairly flat-lined growth, and we need to be thinking about that. So that's more a economic impact scenario as opposed to the visitor flow information, but this visitor flow information is really helpful to us in building a tourism strategy.
Sorry, wrong button. No further speakers, so I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Moving to item 9, which is the submission to the Ministry of Transport GPS statement. And this, what we are asking is to retrospectively approve the submission. This submission is primarily, I guess, more technical in nature, but a significant amount of work has gone into it. So, Ms. Parfitt, I'll let you introduce the item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As you pointed out, it's really a procedural matter to approve the submission that did go in. I would like to point out that the Ministry of Transport acknowledged our submission on this occasion, thanked us for our submission. We haven't heard back since, so we made some comments, proposed changes. We were assisted by our consultant, Mr. Cree, in preparing the submission. The proposed changes to a number of measures, particularly those relating to regions that weren't considered metropolitan or high growth areas, which was pointed out by Madam Mayor, I think in the MOT workshop, that it was important that we made that point, and we did. So the submission was duly sent off with a covering letter from the Chairman, and was acknowledged, but we have heard nothing more since.
Thank you. Yeah, for me, it was certainly acknowledging what we thought was positive about the GPS, and certainly, you know, this council's made many positive statements in supporting the direction it's taken, but really starting to pick up where some of the high-level statements or ideas were not translating to where we thought positive outcomes should be for areas like Nelson, and then there are, again, talking back to South Island RTC chairs, very consistent messages coming through where if you're provincial or rural New Zealand, and your state highway functions very, very differently to what a big 4-laner does between Auckland and Hamilton, for example, and the role is often more like a local road, and I guess some acknowledgement that there might have to be a change in thinking. So the intentions, or as certainly as we thought they were meant from the GPS, actually rolled out to on the ground. And also I thought some really, really positive work around requesting some measures that could make everything tangible. So anyone got any questions or want to add to this further? Madam Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Apologies, I can't remember what the measure was for high growth now, what metrics it was based on. I thought it was due to go for a review. Was it a 2016 figure and due for an update in 2018 or something like that? Does anyone remember what that was in the GPS?
Yeah, Statistics New Zealand has a definition, and I think they do estimates every year, updated estimates, but I think everyone was waiting for the census to reset. But I think on the last estimate, you were very close to whatever their threshold was, but they have a formula that they use, and it's just applied on that basis through the GPS.
So we don't think that formula's, we've got the output yet from that last round. We're still waiting on that. No, it's actually quite important, so we do need to track that just to see what's happening on that. Look, I thought it was some really good points, so well done on the submission. I just have a sense, given what would be quite helpful, and I guess this is whether we can, I always think we can continue to engage with the ministry at any stage, just like we engage with the NZTA at any stage, and that's, how it should be, given the interrelationship between the three levels. And I just think after having gone to the NZTA workshop that Jim hosted here, and getting the bands, that very good graph that had the bands of the dollars that sat within each category to give us a sense of what the wriggle room was, that actually, now I've seen that, I have a very different view around, or perhaps I better understand what the implications of the GPS were when it came to actually now putting the funding bands alongside them, and essentially what that meant, as we described in that meeting, is we had a GPS that we liked the words around, and we thought that was looking good, but when we actually went to apply the funding categories that would then go with the delivery end, you recognise that that all was not equal in New Zealand, and you basically had parts of New Zealand that were green lighted, you had parts that were in an orange context and some that were kind of in the red stop category. I think we're sitting in the orange band with some potential, but certainly we're not in the green lighted areas as Auckland, Wellington, some of the major, the major metros where they've got a real ability to access the funds that have been allocated through those GPS bands. And I just wonder, Mr. Chair, whether it's worth actually a bit of a follow-up letter, and it might be something you want to talk with the RT South, particularly with the South Island RTC chairs about to say, look, is it time you actually went up to have a sit down in Wellington to say, look, let's really have a look at this, because the funding, we can get as enthusiastic as we like, as I said, about the words, but if the funding's already allocated out, there's nothing left over. You can like it, but you can't access it. It's kind of like saying, yep, we want a whole lot more public transport. Yeah, we're really good for that. That'd be fantastic, but we're never going to actually get into the ability to buy it because that's already been all consumed. Or if we're looking at some of the access issues again, if there's a presumption around metros, and we have to argue our way up on being one of the high growth areas and we're only just tipping in there, but there's still not enough to go around, then we get no further ahead. And I think the challenge here is to get the alignment between, at the moment I almost feel like we've got a two-tier GPS system. We've got a GPS system for those who have the potential for introduction of rail networks, which we can't have. And those who have got the ability to have, major public transport changes, huge investments that we can't have. And then we have another category of New Zealand that really isn't going to be the major beneficiary. In part we will, but not in full. And I think that's a conversation that needs to be had, that it is not all equal when it comes to the GPS. There are some very big drivers, no pun intended, because they're not in this case, that push the funding away from regions like ours.
Jim, if you'd like to comment on that, and also just a quick question if you could add into your response. When do those buckets of funding get set? So when the GPS comes out, does that come with those funding buckets, or is that later?
The draft GPS usually has a range in it for each activity class. So let's just pick a number for the sake of the conversation. So let's assume public transport. The draft GPS will have a bottom figure, make it 500 million, and a top figure, make it 800 million. So that would mean nationally there's 500 to 800 million to be allocated out. That's typically what the draft GPS does. But when you saw those graphs recently, what it added a bit of intelligence was saying, well, even within my hypothetical example, there will be commitments to run the current public transport system in New Zealand. So what might be more helpful for the next draft GPS is where there's a commitment. So of that range, whatever it is, what is already committed, you've already got contracts, you've got maintenance contracts, we've got them for a state highway, etc. So you can then see how reasonable or not the bit that's left over is, and that becomes the aspirational conversation that you would have with the Ministry of Transport, because they set that with the Minister. You know, obviously they seek our advice and they're obliged to do that, but it's actually a policy call. So I think you need a bit more information to help you know what you can play with and what you can't, because the other side of it, which is on the income side, and you mentioned that, you know, road user charges and fuel excise duty went up today. Well, we run a user pays system, so that produces a certain amount of money as forecast through the Ministry of Transport again each year. So the two have to work together. So I think, and that's a very important strategic conversation, which maybe needs a bit more attention than it's had in the past.
And just very quickly, I think the fundamental is that from looking at those numbers and seeing what was already committed and what was there wasn't nearly enough money put into transport across the country. And where it was put in, it was in areas where we were going to have some difficulty accessing in terms to bring in new projects, because there's just so much already committed. And then if we have some of those really big infrastructure projects, you know, needing additional budget, they pretty much swamp everything that's left. And it does feel very much, you know, like we're trying to be aspirational here, we want to be aspirational, but we actually need some dollars in there that will allow us, and even the conversation that we had at that meeting around the way the GPS was written and made reference to, or it might have been the IAF reference to be able to access Provincial Growth Fund, when every conversation that has been had with the administrators of the Provincial Growth Fund is, please don't talk to us about roading projects, you can't come around the back door for that, money is on the transport budget, we don't want to know. So we've got very mixed messages that we need to tidy up in terms of where the money comes from.
I think that's a very fair comment. Councillor Barker.
Yeah, thank you. Page 29, section 7, the section on livable cities. Are you suggesting that there be no public or on-street car parks in a livable city?
That's number, not no.
Right. Makes a big difference. And the other one is on section 3, on the previous page. This is pedestrian and cyclist injuries. Will that include injuries resulting from footpaths that are not level for ageing populations? A point that was raised at the last meeting about Nelson's, and particularly the Te Hununui Cycleway being constructed, which is not aged pedestrian friendly.
Can anybody who might be across the technical detail of that level help us out here?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we don't really have the level of detail. I strongly suspect not, because so much of that goes unreported, as a lot of our cycle crashes go unreported as well. We pick it up a little bit through our service request system locally, but I doubt that the Ministry of Transport would be, they may be looking at ACC data on trips and falls, but we don't have that level of information.
Thanks, yeah, I fear the GTA doesn't have the full picture.
Okay, if there are no further questions, can we have somebody move, I think we'll take it as a whole, so move that we receive the report and approve retrospectively the submission from the Regional Transport Committee Chair to the Ministry of Transport. Thank you, Councillor Matheson. Seconded by the Mayor. Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak to it?
Mr. Chair, that looking at this document, it might mean something to others, but to me, without having the actual original document, I've got no idea actually what we were referencing while we were doing all that. So I can't honestly say whether I approve it of it or not, because I don't know what the original was. It wasn't appended to the agenda, unfortunately.
No, you're right, and I suppose it could have been, but from
Probably,
citing that document, it was, yes, rather weighty and did require some
So I'd have to say that,
close officer input to line things up so it made any sense at all.
so I'd have to just say that I don't know how to vote because I don't know what I'm voting on. So I'd say the information isn't quite, but I think it would probably be fine with my colleagues who might have seen the document.
I do have a lot of confidence that there was significant work that went into lining everything up and the outputs make good sense.
So I'm going to have to abstain because I don't think I've got enough information because I don't understand the document.
Sure. Right, so we'll put that, all those in favour, aye, against, carried. Right, and now we'll move to item 10, which is the Nelson Future Access report. Actually, no, we won't. We've been going for an hour and a half. We'll have a 5-minute cup of tea break. 6-minute cup of tea break. Meeting's adjourned. The NZTA team to the meeting. Thank you. Moving along to item 10, the Nelson Future Access updates, and hand over to Coral and Reese from NZTA.
Thank you. So the key thing of this is to just give you an update on the project and where we're at the moment. The report you've been provided, I think we've now provided some paper copies of the ILM. It was pretty hard to read in the attachment. So where we're at is we are rapidly working through the evidence collection phase, and as part of that we've updated the what we call the ILM, which is the investment logic map, which is effectively just a summary of the problems and the core reason we're looking to invest, and we've updated that. There's two parts of that. The first thing is just to reflect the changed strategic environment, and secondly to really make sure that it's got longevity through any other potential political or other changes as this goes through its life cycle. So we're happy to take questions on the ILM, but that is the current updated version, and it's the basis of the rest of the business case development. And then we are also working rapidly through the other setup factors for the work program, which Reece will.
So Coral, since you've mentioned the ILM, are you confident that the problem statements and the benefits identified align well with the intent of the GPS?
So there's two parts to this. Firstly, the problem statements we think do have a lot more longevity now, and they are ones that will either be well based with evidence or are really just the problems we always hear about. So even if we can't justify them with evidence, they're very good perception ones which are equally valid in terms of going forward, and they are the ones that come up regularly. In terms of alignment with the GPS, we do think that they have good alignment with the GPS at the moment. Not all of them, obviously, but generally have really good alignment with the GPS. But more importantly, they'll have alignment going forward that we can justify this as a good project under any political environment. So yes, but also it's just a better setup for the project through the entire life cycle.
Through the chair, just to reinforce that, particularly if you look at the benefit side of solving those problems, you'll notice accessibility, safety, quality urban environments come up. If you look at the previous benefit work that was done in problem statements, they weren't anything, that they were much more about movement of freight, much more about safety, and not a lot else, and travel time reliability. So this looks quite different to the previous, investment logic map benefit statement from the strategic business case that was presented maybe 2 years ago.
And so this better reflects that this project is very much looking at the whole network as opposed to a piece of it.
Correct, and it's also picking up the susceptibility of the network to more climatic events and natural events which will impact on reliability of people's ability to get around, irrespective of whether that's a walking, cycling or a road network.
Thank you. Councillor Matheson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for your indulgence today. Can I go to page 34? And it says in the second paragraph, the problems and benefits study to do by the wider project reference group, which can include councillors in August. Could you please explain to me, is it all councillors? Is it selected representative councillors or what?
So we'll touch on this as part of the community engagement section as well, but the project reference group is very much a community-based group which effectively become our conscience and the transparency in the process as we go through the option development. Councillors are representatives of the community, so they're equally as valid attendees in that project reference group. It is not, it's, I guess it becomes a case of where there is interest to be involved. So the invite will go out and it will be a case of working out with the project reference group as we go through that process.
So it's up to the councils to decide if it's all councils or representatives?
I guess the key thing is we didn't want to exclude those people who had who really wanted to be involved in that group. So at the moment we have left it a little loose, just to make sure that the invite is available to everyone, and how that progresses we'll work through.
Okay, so it's just that one meeting in August.
There is several sessions. It's 4 key
So
stages.
just if we've got specific questions on the ILM, because that's what I know that there's more coming about how everything else rolls out. So if there's
Just hold.
questions not on specifically the ILM, then we'll hold them because I know they're going to be got to.
So that's it.
Okay.
That's it.
No, we come back to it.
Oh, you're going to come back to it?
Unless you've got something specifically on the ILM and these
No.
problem statements and benefits,
No.
then we'll come back to the wider questions.
Okay.
Councillor McGurk.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and through you. I'm just looking at the problems that are listed there, those sort of the broad statements, I guess, and I'm just wondering, on what basis some of those problems were identified, or what sort of evidence or data are we relying on to quantify those statements?
So that is part of what we're working through at the moment. Obviously, we've got the evidence and the data that was presented through the program business case as well, and we absolutely are building on that. What we're also doing at the moment is, for example, looking at the technical reports around the seawall. We're looking at some of the modelling around sea level rise and climate change. So there is just other, and network hierarchy, for example. So we are looking at other evidence collection at the moment. All of this will come together. You're right, these are very high level statements. These will all come together in what we call the strategic case, and we will be presenting a final draft version of that. I think if we can get an RTC before this session closes, it will come back to the group then with the more complete information.
So, so we will be presented with a more refined definition of what the problem is with.
So these are just effectively sort of headline statements, and so the report, which we call the strategic case, will come back and it will be the evidence-based and the more expanded versions which really dig into what's causing and what's and what the effects of these problem statements are.
Yeah. Well, let's take the top one, for example, is that the inability of transport. It just talks about between Stoke and Nelson City, but there's nothing going the other way from between Stoke and Richmond, for example. When you look at the feedback.
So because this is really first and foremost looking at the movement which is currently constrained by Rocks Road, we've set a boundary. What we also look at is everything else that's going on around that. So effectively the Stoke to Nelson is looking at our specific project area. We absolutely take into effect the traffic movements and the demands that are pushing traffic through that corridor.
The challenge if we use the title Nelson Access Study is that access to Nelson from the south and the west has to go through that part of the network as well.
Yes, it does, but the study area is quite clearly defined, and so this project cannot be the answer to every question in L across the entire top of the South Island. So those inputs, and that's why TDC, for example, are identified as a key stakeholder as part of inputting into how the network functions, but the study area is well defined. Councillor Lorick.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. So my question about the investment logic map goes like this. The study started as a result of a decision in the 2014, that came out of the 2014 general election in 2015. It's 2019 now, and we've got these problems listed and the benefits. I would have thought that was all blatantly obvious with respect in 2015, or in fact probably in 2010. Why in 2019 are we looking at an investment logic map which has these, what I think are statements of the obvious, things that have been obvious for a very long time?
So we have absolutely built upon the work that was done in the program business case. So this is just the next evolution in terms of getting to a solution that will be buildable and that will be fundable. What we are also looking at is updating this. So the last problem statements were very previous GPS oriented, so they were very much about congestion and traffic movements, and hence why we've also updated this just to reflect the fact that the environment has changed. And we also think that these ones will now have a lot more longevity, so we won't have to keep re-looking at these problem statements. So it's not that we are starting from scratch, it's just that we have updated this so that we believe it's the good base and a solid base for moving forward.
Okay, thank you.
The other point linked to that, Mr. Chairman, is that if we'd left the original problem statements in the previous language and going to the changes happening to the investment assessment framework, it would have been quite difficult to come up with a fundable case, particularly for changes to walking and cycling more so than the roadside. So, the policy settings that we're working in are different compared to where they were today. So they've looked at the evidence base. This is workshop with people with knowledge in this room and some others, and this is the new set, which then allows us to build a case around these, which will give us the best position to potentially get some funding.
Councillor Noonan.
Look, my question relates to the seawall. So is this a good time?
Yeah. Probably not. We'll probably tackle that a little bit later, which sort of goes more to the recommendation about timing and alignment. So, yeah.
Come back to me then.
Sure. Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, just in terms of feedback on the ILM, I'm comfortable with what is there. It seems to me to be good, robust problem definition, and the benefits certainly flow through to be more reflective of what I consider to be important benefits. I'm very pleased to see that you have included increasing carbon neutrality, or words that mean the same thing, I hope. Hopefully getting to zero, but we'll work our way there. And I just think in terms of the adjustment, I agree with Coral. I think they're actually they're better. They're more neutral. They're more neutral statements in the sense that they make sense to Nelson, as opposed to the previous ones, which they're clearly, they have to have some alignment with the GPS, and as GPS has changed with different governments, they have to be adjusted. But this feels pretty good. This feels really solid, and I look forward to going through the next steps with it. In terms of it's the sort of the steps we're at, I think we have to go back and just remind ourselves that the arterial traffic study wasn't the end of looking at issues in Nelson, and actually acknowledged that we needed to come back and do further work. So we knew that had to happen. In the interim, we had some government funding, not NZTA funding, provided for the Nelson Southern Link investigation. And the positive thing that we've got here is that we've now got through the Nelson Land Transport Plan, Regional Land Transport Plan, and through it went up in proposal into the National Land Transport Plan. We now have, this is an NZTA funded project, and that's why it's working through. And so I think that's a really positive step, because it means that we have, we've got the resources to sit across and the knowledge base that we can tap into right across the NZTA framework. And I think that sits us in a really good position for doing the next stages. I'm looking forward to getting on with it. And I'm sure there's only a little bit that I'm not so happy about, but you're going to come to that a little bit later.
So, all right. Let's nice quick.
One quick question. I'm just looking. That is that you may come up with an option that is certainly resilient, but in terms of urban design and the look and feel of the city, it would be the last thing you'd even consider. So I'm looking at sort of overseas examples where you might say, oh, well, the area is susceptible to flooding, so the area to build that is a high, an elevated expressway, which is probably might be inconsistent with the look and feel we're wanting for Nelson. So I'm just wondering, I would see, if you're going to make that sort of a problem, the way it contributes to our urban environment, I think it's critical. There's two KPIs there that I see are directly relevant to it. So
I think that's an excellent pickup. I think that makes quite a bit of sense to me. So would you guys be able to consider that, not make a decision on the spot by any stretch, but just have a think about, does that fit in the map? And
Absolutely, we can look at that, and also that's part of how this will evolve as well, as we'll get the evidence, we'll get some baseline data, and we'll absolutely be able to see whether those map together as well.
Councillor Barker.
Thank you. Yes, I think this is good, but particularly the second one, the conflicting uses and the safety of neighbourhoods. I don't think that emphasis was in the original 2014 and all those years through, and it's now that we are actually realising the congestion that's occurring on our main arteries is because of the congestion creating safety problems in our neighbourhoods. And I'm really pleased that you've got up there the rat races that occur in this city. There's a lot of them, and where they have been encouraged through urban areas, through residential areas, past kindergartens, because traffic can't just move through the city. So I'm glad it's there, and it wasn't in the early ones.
Right, so I think we're going to move on now, but I would just say well done, guys, because you're hearing statements like, oh, these seem obvious, and then broad agreement, which, given actually how hard it is to get to this point, means I think you've done really good work. So, yeah, well done. So over to you, Reece, about next steps in the presentation.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. I'll now cover section 4.2, the stakeholder and community engagement that we have planned for this project. So broadly, we've got 3 levels of engagement proposed. First one with our iwi partners, the 8 iwi on the top of the south, and we have an initial session as part of a council forum that you typically run on the 18th of July. We will look to map out how iwi wish to engage with this project. So that's kind of the first level of engagement. Second one is we plan to form a project reference group, and as we talked before, councillors would be all invited along to that project reference group, and that also includes a number of all of the sort of community leaders and stakeholders would be invited to be part of that project reference group. So yeah, that's a dedicated group of stakeholders from the community. That project reference group will run throughout the project, and you can see in the table on page 36 the 4 sort of significant steps that we propose to use that project reference group to help us co-design some of the community decisions on the project. And we've sort of purposefully labelled them as steps because depending on the size of the group and how much business we need to transact in each of those, it may be one or it may be multiple workshops. You'll also see that those 4 steps there on how we're going to be engaging with the project reference group is colour-coded into the schedule on the back page there in the yellow colour, so you can kind of make a correlation with the schedule. The third level of engagement that we propose on this project is the public consultation and engagement phases. So there's 2 key phases where we need to seek the public's input and engage with them. The first most significant one will be in March 2020 on the shortlist options, and then again in June once we get to a draft proposal. But we also have already up and running a project website that has all of the historic documents available, FAQs, up, and we envisage that obviously ongoing newsletters and press releases and the like will be put out throughout the project. I think, yeah, I'd sort of largely take that as read, but hopefully I've provided a bit of summary, a bit of context, and happy to take questions on that section.
Does anyone have any questions specifically relating to the engagement plan? Councillor Laurie?
Thanks, Chairman. I'm just bringing up the Nelson Future Access Project study page on NZTA's website, and historically there seems to have been quite a considerable, through the chair, lag between things happening and then them appearing where the public can find them online. Is that going to, so I look here, project updates, there's something from 2019, which is great, which is April, but do you envisage this being a busier place, and will people be able to get more information from it?
Through the chair, that's certainly the intention. I mean, we updated that last week with a set of new FAQs, and yeah, there's also a tool called Social Pinpoint, which allows people to sort of put a point on the map and write a comment in it. And at certain stages through the project, when we're seeking information from the community, we'll be using tools like that. So certainly, you know, the world is obviously moving on from a technology point of view from where we've been previously. So yeah, I see that as sort of one of the key ways of engaging. It's very telling when we look at other projects that the agency are doing now, that they get, you know, 10, 20, 50 people at open days, but hits on websites and pins on social, the Social Pinpoint thing, you know, hundreds if not thousands. So whilst there's value in open days and the like, actually the electronic formats seem to gather much better customer insight in terms of numbers.
And through the chair, you'll be letting everyone know that they can make those contributions online.
That's right, yes.
Right. Thanks.
Madam Mayor?
Yeah, I just have to say, I really like use the Social Pinpoint, I think, for the Atify, for the Nelson to Blenheim route. I think that was the one. Is that what the tool you were using there? Yeah, and it was really interesting, I have to say, really, really effective. I found it great to look through, and certainly gave us a look in to see what people were thinking about that Atify stretch. The only question I have around that one is in terms of integrity of data, how do you assure yourselves that you're not being you're not getting the same person telling you 25 times about what they're concerned about with a different name?
The customer insights like that, just like open days, provide you the insights and they provide you the potential things. And certainly from us, from an evidence perspective, it might give us a link to information we weren't previously aware of. However, as much as we will talk about it, we will say which way things are leaning. We do have to validate anything which will fundamentally influence the way we go in direction. So yeah, we do need to ground truth. The really important part of that is being able to answer FAQs, knowing what kind of information we need to provide, knowing where we've potentially missed information, and just looking at how we develop it. But we do have to ground truth, real fundamental information.
So we take that as qualitative, not quantitative feedback, essentially, because I have seen it reported as quantitative feedback.
And certainly in terms of saying, you know, we are seeing approximately 50% for, 50% against, for example, we will report that kind of information, but that is often about testing the appetite for the project rather than necessarily driving a decision.
So then how do you make sure that you're not getting gamed? Because if you're reporting percentages and somebody can, you know, decide, well, actually I really, you know, we really want something done in our area, and I'm going to send an email out to all of my relatives around New Zealand and ask them to get on here and put a comment on here to get this changed. How do you address that?
So Reece may have a bit more technical answer. I don't entirely know what Pinpoint uses, and we can come back to you with that. Certainly in the past with the agency, we've used Google Analytics, and it talks about a number of unique users, location and things like that. So I'm guessing we can pull that information from it, but we can come back. Yeah.
Yeah, I think particularly if you are going to use that data for anything other than identifying potential issues, and then we need to be confident it's robust. Councillor Noonan.
Thank you, Mr Chair. That was exactly my concern, what the Mayor has just raised, and I think that perhaps if you have to put in an email address or a phone number or something, email address is probably the most efficient, then you can't go around opening too many emails, but, creating email addresses for yourself 100 times. But yes, I think we need to know that they are unique and not one person many times.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to the next piece around the 4.3 program update.
Thank you, through the chair. So now I just want to give a bit of a program update. So back in April, I talked to the program, and at that point we were working hard towards trying to deliver the short to medium term interventions for Rocks Road prior to the local body elections. It became very obvious when we started delving deep into the structural capacity of the wall and the sea level rise issues that the interventions that were likely going to be considered for Rocks Road were going to be significantly different than what was consulted with the community back in 2016. And so, yeah, that whole relationship between the seawall and resilience needed to be linked to the longer term business case. So we made the decision that we actually needed to push the Rocks Road project out to run in parallel with the wider detailed business case, so that we could make sure that we did the work as robustly as we could, and to reflect the risks and complexities of all of those competing interests. So I have included a program on page 38 of the agenda that shows the Rocks Road component, which is in the bottom boxes there, now that has similar decision making, or the same decision making points as the wider detailed business case. And yeah, I'm happy now I realise there's probably quite some disappointment around the room around that, but it was obviously made with the best interests of the project to minimise the risks. And yeah, it will obviously be a more efficient and robust way moving forward as well.
So, thank you. So is it fair to say then that you've had enough of a look to be able to rule out any meaningful improvements to Rocks Road that aren't tens of millions of dollars? And therefore, if it's a big project, then it has to be in full knowledge of every other moving piece.
I think where we've got to is that we aren't able to push ahead with a Rocks Road walking and cycling intervention without fully understanding the intricacies behind the remaining life available in the seawall and the sea level rise and all those sorts of things. We had hoped, based on the work done in the program business case, that we might be able to progress one of those options ahead of the wider DBC, and that there's just too much going on there and quite a bit of change with the most recent Ministry of Fair Environment forecast and the like, that simply would be putting too much risk into the project.
Understood. Thank you. I think everyone will have a few questions, so we'll start with the committee and go from there. So, Councillor Matheson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Please, can you tell me when you made that decision? Because it never came to, as far as I'm aware, to an RTC meeting.
No.
Through the chair, no, that was initially the working group sought steering group's advice on that with the risks, and then and the steering group made made a recommendation, and then that recommendation has been taken on by the agency.
Well, the reason I'm raising this because it's a significant part of this whole plan that we're looking at, our transport plan. And I thought it would have been nice to actually have been advised a bit earlier than this, that, you know, you were planning to do what you did. And I wasn't aware of it. In fact, I know conversations have been held generally amongst councillors saying things like, well, if we can get this Rocks Road section done first, it'd be really helpful, you know, build around it and so forth, on the pretext that we were still going to that original timeline. So I didn't know.
Councillor Noonan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, when I read this, I actually wonder whether there's any ability for the state highway to remain where it is. And is there testing being done to see if there is, I mean, obviously the seawall is important and it's going to restrict what we can do, but is there testing being done to make sure that it is actually secure enough to remain there in the future?
We're doing that now.
Through the chair, certainly understanding the structural capability of the seawall is one part of the evidence collecting that we're doing, but you know, the current system management team around there are managing that wall in its current state and maintaining and renewing that wall in its current state. What this project is considering is what might it need to do in the future for all of the demands that we want to place on it in the future.
So through the chair, is the NZTA doing that, the NZTA are doing that testing?
Through the chair, yes, that's right. So every 2 years there's a significant inspection done of that wall. Problem areas are identified and repaired as part of the ongoing maintenance and renewals.
So through the chair, one more question, I guess, is the minute you realise that actually it's not the future of the state highway because it's not strong enough for whatever reason. I mean, we know that sea pounds in there, so obviously it's going to take a toll on the seawall. And one wonders whether you're going to actually keep ploughing money into that seawall because it's not going to be cheap as we're going on. I guess we would then hear about it, would we not? Mr. Harlan's jumping to put his finger on the...
Well, I think through the chair, I mean, the whole purpose of this work is to identify the demand side. You know, where's the pressure coming on for more traffic, whatever form it takes, walking, cycling, freight, etc. What are the options going forward, which would take into account the feasibility, which includes, you know, susceptibility in this case to climate change, sea level rise and all of that. What is the remaining life of the wall? What are the options you could do with it? What can you do with Waimea Road, etc., etc. And ultimately a list of shortlisted options with cost benefits will come through the committee, be consulted on with the public, and then a final recommendation as the package going forward. So I guess this wall is perhaps more problematic than we thought when we first started the project, but the timetable for final decisions is the same, and we've still got $1.9 million worth of money for any short-term interventions on Rocks Road, which is untouched by this, you know, this program now. So that hasn't changed either.
So if I could just respond to the chair. Short-term interventions of 1.9, but that doesn't seem to be going to go any further than short-term. I'm getting a little bit nervous that the state highway may not in the future be able to be in that spot, and that's going to impact other things that we do, which is where I'm going to really. Where the NZTA choose to put their state highway, I guess, is one thing, but the impact of it on the rest of our network is going to be, we will want to know as soon as we possibly can, won't we, Mr. Chair?
Well, hence this entire project is seeking to answer those questions in a integrated fashion that is driven by evidence. And so how long will it take? Well, we have a layout in front of us as to the program, and I am quite confident that our partners at NZTA will update us along the way if any of that changes. Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just need to go back and I must have misheard what was here before, but I just need to check. So I heard that almost 3 years ago, you knew there was a problem with the seawall. Did I get that wrong? I'm really feeling like I've missed something here.
Through the chair, what I said was back in 2016, when the last engagement was undertaken around options for Rocks Road. Start again. The options there it's looking like, knowing what we know about the seawall and about sea level rise, are likely to be different than the options that we consulted with the community on in 2016.
Right,
That's what I'm saying. So we originally predicated accelerating the Rocks Road project on the basis that we would be unlikely to need to do significant community engagement around those options because it had already been done.
That's correct.
Right. So what we're saying now is those 4 options that were broadly consulted on in 2016, they're likely to be different, knowing what we know today.
Right, so...
Therefore, we think there's far too much risk in pushing an accelerated program on Rocks Road without taking the community with us.
All right, so you haven't, so that's good, we've got that clarified. So you haven't been, I must admit we've had no exposure into what was happened after the engagement process. So I have to say I've seen no outputs from the 2016 engagement process that disappeared. I don't think it's ever been reported back to this committee, and there's been requests around it, but it's never come back. And so now in my mind I've got this question mark around about what stage did you recognise that there were going to be, what stage did information come forward post the options that you consulted on in 2016 that has caused you to today, 3 years later, go, this is actually a whole lot more challenging than we thought it was in 2016. About what point did you start to recognise that?
Through the chair, around probably May, when we started pulling together the evidence for this particular project to try and align up with the draft ILM map that we had at that point in time. So we started interrogating the inspection reports around the wall. We started looking at the Ministry for Environment sea level rise reports and thinking about the kinds of challenges that Rocks Road corridor has from a resilience point of view, led us to believe that actually the options that were considered back in 2016 were probably not broad enough.
Okay, so that was a further question. So I'm just trying to remind myself. So between 2016 and May 2019, the Rocks Road walking and cycling project from memory has always been in, that was the one that we did have in our LTP. It was in there. So was NZTA doing no work on that project in that period? What was lined up for those years? What stages was it at? And why did nothing happen for 3 years, despite this council writing repeatedly about the urgency of that project and how important it was to us?
Through the chair, that project was being progressed as part of the program business case. So that consultation was part of the program business case. That went to the board, I think it was July 2017, from memory. And then we were waiting for alignment of the GPS to be able to kick this project off. Okay. We started working with this council back November last year and developing the scope up for this project.
All right, so the program business case went through the process, and then it's really this year that you've had to go back and say, look, there are some fairly crunchy technical issues that are going to have to be thrashed out. And what you're saying to us today is that you need to you need to now align that. So we've asked as a council, we've said we'd like the Rocks Road walking and cycling project advanced as a priority. And what you're saying to us is that you're not in a position to do that. And in this next stage, it's going to have to run in tandem as part of the future access study. Hopefully I've understood that correctly.
Yes, so the potential long-term option for the main movement corridor is now so closely aligned that we feel like we need to really understand that long-term option before we can progress improvements on Rocks Road.
Okay, you're right, that's going to be very disappointing to this council and this community who've been waiting a very long time for that waterfront, these issues to be addressed. It's going to come as very disappointing news. Just go and have we think about that.
Councillor Laurie, then Councillor Barker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got a few questions. First of all, so parts of, basically, why did NZTA not know about the state of the seawall holding up your highway before you decided to fast track the business case for safety improvements to the waterfront in December last year? Why didn't you know about the state of the seawall holding up your highway?
Through the chair, that seawall's inspected every 2 years. I think when we were scoping the project back with council in December 2018, we didn't have the latest information on that wall from those reports, and in hindsight we should have looked at those reports and had that inform our program and not been, I guess, as bullish as we were in terms of endeavouring to undertake Rocks Road much faster. I think also the wall is only one component of that. I think we've got the sea level rise issue as well. So it's not just the remaining life of the wall that we want to understand better, but there's all sorts of factors there as well around sea level rise. The increase in intensity of storms, understanding what that is all going to look like in the future, which may shape what a project might need to look like.
So sorry,
if I could just clarify as well, it's not the whole wall that's at risk. What we've known for a while is that there are short sections of the wall that are more at risk and have a shorter life than the whole wall. And I guess what we're looking at now is understanding where we want to do the work and where those areas of risk are. And what we're getting into with the detail is that we need to understand the whole wall, not just those couple of sections that would otherwise have been fixed through renewals.
Okay, so with respect, in December last year, I think NZTA knew about climate change. I can't imagine that you've learned that much more about climate change between December last year and July this year. Maybe you've learned something, but I can't imagine it's been that significant. What have you've obviously learned something about the wall that you didn't know in December last year. What have you learned?
So it's not about the wall per se, it's about the combination of understanding that if we went in there now and tried to address walking and cycling, we would potentially be discounting options that are available to us long-term for the entire movement corridor. And so it's the combination of we thought we'd be able to accelerate walking and cycling, and so that's the reason we really thought we'd be able to get early wins. And what we're saying now is, there is potentially still an option for early wins, but we don't want to run towards those potential early wins at the potential cost of the long-term options. So yes, there's factors with the wall, but it's not new information about the wall, it's the combination of the wall, the climate change, the resilience, and what that potential long-term option will be. And so we will choose to accelerate walking and cycling if we can, but we just don't want to rush into that until we really understand what that long-term option will look like.
And through the chair, Mr. Palmer, you said that you realised that the interventions would be considerably different to what you consulted on in 2016. What interventions potentially did you identify?
Through the chair, we haven't identified any interventions at this point in time, but I guess when we consider all of those challenges, the interventions are likely to be different than what we consulted on in 2016. So we consulted on, for example, a 2.9 metre shared path. Now, in the current climate with e-scooters, e-bikes, far greater numbers of people potentially taking to those kinds of modes, is a 2.9 metre shared path a good option. So yeah, whilst we haven't looked at absolute interventions, what we consulted on in 2016, I think we've moved as an industry along, and we've got a whole bunch of other challenges coming in that are going to need us to think differently and propose options that are different.
Okay, my last question through the chair is, I do feel a little bit like I'm experiencing a deja vu in that I'm being told that NZTA is going to make a big, or finish a big study about the future of Nelson's Transport, and it might come out just before the general election. And we've all been there before, and it just seems really bizarre when you consider that this work started, like I said earlier, in 2015. Any thoughts?
The study is aligned to allow a robust regional land transport plan to be developed in the tail end of 2020. So that's our target date.
I guess without reference to timing and elections, I guess the other thing we've got is that no matter what option we recommend, we're going to be in a very difficult consenting environment. And so first and foremost, we want to make sure that when we recommend an option at the end of this, it's an option that will be fundable and it's an option that will get through consenting. And when we're going through an option that has potentially been declined before, or an option that is within the coastal marine area, both of those options are just incredibly high risk. And so first and foremost, we want to make sure that when we get to the end of this stage, we've got an option we can deliver. And that's our main driver.
It sounded like you just said Waimea Road. It sounded like
did not
you said
Waimea.
the future is Waimea Road. It just sort of...
Councillor Barker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it's very disappointing. If not, I think many people would say appalling. This council has just recently, based on evidence produced from government and coastal policy people and NIWA and others, declared a climate change emergency. And much of that decision was based upon what's happening at Rocks Road and what's likely to happen at Rocks Road. And this council has put an awful lot of ratepayers' money into immediately declaring a climate change emergency. And I think it's just not on that we have to wait from central government, our partners, to come and meet us and recognise that there is this climate change emergency, because it's virtually do nothing. And in the meantime, we are proceeding at this council. So the question is, can you get back to your leaders, your government people, that there is a great deal of frustration in Nelson City. It has, virtually at the behest of the government, declared a climate change emergency, and we're not getting any action on the other side.
I'm going to point of order you on that, Councillor Barker. Your comment that this council declared a climate change emergency at the bequest of this government is false.
I will say that...
It was withdrawn. It was false.
Let's just bring some order back into this and hang on through the chair.
Yeah.
Councillor Barker, do you have any evidence that the climate change emergency was declared at the behest of central government?
I have absolutely no evidence that it was declared at the behest of central government, but what I'm saying is that there definitely has been pressure from central government.
No, I'm sorry, that is a false statement.
Councillor Barker, Madam Mayor, I'm going to uphold your point of order, and so if you could please withdraw that comment, Councillor Barker, that that central government pressured this council to make a climate change declaration. If you don't have evidence to back that up.
I'll withdraw the specific words in relation to that.
Thank you.
I'll withdraw and apologise for the specific words.
Okay, thank you. Now, did you have a question or? So I think that question has been adequately answered in my opinion already, and that is that putting this project into one stream of work gives the best possible chance of having an outcome that is fundable and consentable. So if that's the advice we're getting, whether we like the timing or we're disappointed in it, I think it is where it is. So we'll take the advice of the professionals that at the end of this, we do want a result and we do want to see some action. So,
but I think, if I may,
we're trusting for you to guide us there in the best way possible. Mr. Harland and then Councillor Matheson.
I appreciate the concern and frustration around the table about perhaps the time this is taking. We had to push very hard to get the funding to enable this study to happen. Post changing government, all unfunded, unstate highway improvement type projects were put on hold to be assessed whether or not they fitted with the new GPS priorities. I think there are 11 or 12 state highway type safety intervention projects in the North Island that are not progressing even to this stage. So, thanks to the efforts of some people around this table and ourselves within the system, we've managed to keep the funding there and keep it moving. I think it's important to remind ourselves that in 12 months' time, there will be a preferred program before your community which they can then have a say on. Prior to that, in March of next year, which is not that far away, there'll be a short list of options to deal with the broader network issues and Rocks Road as a package, because it is a network and it needs to work as a network, and parts of that network are under greater threat this year from what we know than we were 2 or 1 years ago, because people are updating their climate change predictions quite regularly. Sea level rise keeps going up, it's not going down. People keep increasing the frequency, predicted frequency of storms like Cyclone Fahey, etc. All those things are material considerations. So we need to ensure that by March of next year, we've got a credible set of evidence-based shortlisted options which have been generated partly in consultation with this project reference group, which has a broad range of community representatives and will have councillors who wish to attend. So there's a lot of work to be done in a short space of time. And we need to ensure that this work is as high a quality as we can get it to ensure it's got the best chance of competing for funding on a national basis. So you've got Keep Willie Moving, you've got ATAP, you've got a whole raft of other programs in New Zealand which are also wanting to stand up. So we've got to get the best evidence base to ensure your community gets the best chance for funding of whatever the future is. So I appreciate, again, it's frustrating. The end dates are very similar to they were pre the change. It's just simply the team hasn't been able to bring the Rocks Road bit forward for the reasons you've heard.
Thank you for that. Councillor Matheson.
Yeah, I'm just finally, so I echo what the Mayor has said. It's disappointing this has happened, and I really do make a plea for you to better engage with the political side of this council on any changes of that magnitude, because it does have it had an expectation that it was going to go to the top and it was going to stand alone, but you've decided to include it in the plan, and I can see now why you've done it. It's just that, we can actually are trying hard to work with you on this very, very difficult program. It would be nice to be kept in the loop at an earlier date.
Madam Mayor.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just perhaps looking at what we've got to deal with today, which is to receive the report, which I'm happy to move that we do receive the report, just to keep that moving along. Look, I want to really, I do want to recognise the context, and thank Mr. Harland for his advocacy on behalf of Nelson. It is not easy to get these projects into the National Land Transport Fund, and you'll recall that when we had the first draft, it wasn't looking too good, and we went and did quite a bit of work to really understand the assessment. We had this chief executive had a look at that and said, look, we'll engage Mr. Cree as well, just to really go over this, because it's so important to our region that we'll put some resources into it, and it has made it through that process. It is highly competitive, and I think that's the thing that we've got to recognise, that actually getting any money out of the National Land Transport Fund is a challenge. They're just, there isn't enough to go around, and we're in there, and that's a good thing. In some ways, it's almost like a little bit frustrating for me because there's a point where I go, all logic said to me, if we're going to be building anything in the coastal marine environment, then we know how challenging that is, and we're going to have considered all options, and I'm really struggling to understand how we could do one ahead of the other. But no, that was sort of accepted into the process, and everyone said, oh, no, we'll give it a go, and we're back here today going, actually, if you want to build something in the coastal marine environment, and you're going to have to build something, unless it's going to be a very narrow, something very, very narrow, then, or even to do anything in that area. And remember, we're right into that coastal margin on that road, right through to when you get to houses, you're in that space. Then actually you're going to have absolutely looked at the alternative options, and that we know, for those of us who've done enough consenting over the years, know that that's the reality. I guess the objectives now are to make sure that these two projects stay in the with NLTP funding, that we don't lose our position in there, that we keep on track with this project as much as we can and make sure it's properly resourced. We've already had a little bit of slippage in terms of time, and we need to make sure we don't have any more slippage than we keep it moving forward, because it is a critical project for the region. It is a really key part of how we plan our city moving forward. How people move around, the impact that the current network is having on place and design, and as most of us get, emails on a fairly regular basis from residents who are frustrated with the level of traffic that is flowing through their residential streets. They want residential streets. They don't want rat runs. And we also are conscious very much of, once we get these building blocks in place and we actually know what we're doing, we also know that we have a number of parties sitting out at the moment who would like to invest in Nelson, but they need to have certainty around their investment. And so we're going to have to get to a decision point. So let's keep going with this. I've been really impressed with the team who, and Coral, thank you for being here today, have come forward to support the project. I appreciate the fact that there's been a governance group set up that allows us to have some input as Nelson City Council. Given this is an NZTA project, I really appreciate that partnership approach and the approach that we've had today in terms of the consultation stages, which is an invitation to all councillors if they want to be involved in that process, and I think that's a good way forward. But sometimes you really wish for something, and you really wish it was possible, and then you could get your hopes up to 90% and get them dashed back down again, but we'll just have to keep going.
Okay, I'm going to take it that was your speaking in support. So what I'm going to do is just get any questions very specific on that point of question, and then we'll let our NZTA friends leave the table. So if anyone has remaining questions, can you indicate to me now? Councillor Noonan.
Look, I was just looking at the program, and I'm just a word of caution that December, January and February are notoriously not good to interact with Nelsonians, because they generally leave because the place is covered with tourists. So if you want to get a reasonable response, I'd avoid the December, January area.
I think that probably is a fair point for you guys as the project team to be aware of. Councillor Laurie.
So when the study that was originally called the Nelson Southern Link Investigation and is now called the Nelson Future Access Project, when this started in 2014, that came out of a decision, a policy of the previous government to fund 12 transport infrastructure studies around the country. And now we're in 2019 and we're still looking at investment logic maps. Have the other studies all been completed? Because I understand most of them were completed within a couple of years.
I would need to come back to you on that. I have no idea what the other ones were.
I'd also really struggle to see the relevance of that
Just sort of highlights
this. So are there any questions specifically about what we have in front of us today?
And I don't have a specific answer other than everyone is unique. Everyone's at a different stage, but they're all competing for funding. That's the key point.
I'm talking about the 12 from that tranche of work.
They're all different in terms of what they're trying to fix, what the investment logics are and so on. But some of them are further advanced from this, some of them are at the startup stage. So they're in different, every circumstance is different.
Right, so that ends questions. Thank you, guys. Would anyone like to speak to this before we go on? Okay, I will just quickly say thank you to NZTA for the work you've put into this so far, and also for the robust program and team that you're putting around this project. While we've had a couple of initial delays getting forward, I'm confident now that that the program looks deliverable, and we're going to get out of it something that we can actually progress, which, given how long, as we've discussed today, this project in various guises has been around, having a robust plan that has as much community buy-in as possible for the future of Nelson is a critical step. And as a group, if we're able to keep that moving forward, then I think that is a very good thing. Right, so I will put the motion that we receive the report. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Moving to the report, annual monitoring of the Regional Land Transport Plan.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. So this monitoring report comes to the committee annually. We must monitor the measures for our regional land transport plan by legislation, but by choice this committee has it in the plan that it comes here annually. However, there was an administrative oversight and you should have seen this last December, so it is coming to you late. However, we bring it to you today to comply with the intention of our own plan. We will bring it to committee and to provide you with context for the next report. So it's the 1st of July today, and we anticipate you'll see the 18-19 monitoring report at your next RTC meeting, if not the one following that, depending on what those dates are. So I'm going to take the report as read, and I'm happy to take questions on the material provided.
Does anyone have any questions that they would like to ask here?
Well, to get the value, Mr Chair, of Mrs Parfitt's extreme experience and the fact that you've taken the time to join us, can you go to page 42, where you've got these traffic lights? And could you just tell me, when you get down to HPMV roads, do we make a decision to increase the roading availability for those vehicles by another 120 k's? Is that what you're saying?
So through the chair, the table that you're looking at on page 42 is around the regional routes, so those are the state highways.
Right.
On our local roads, we do make decisions around permitting of HPMVs and 50 max trucks. The table on page 42 is in relation to state highway routes.
Oh, right, so it's not local roads. Thank you.
But the reason that's increased, as far as I know, is because of the strengthening that was undertaken post the Kaikoura earthquake. We had to improve productivity, if you like, on the network to make sure it can cope. So that's why there's extra length in there.
Through you, Mr Chair, so that was all the bridges, etc., that were under strength for these vehicles. Okay, thank you.
So there is a lot of red ink on on these reports. Is there anything that is standing out as a surprise to you, or is this absolutely in line with what we all feel that the general congestion picture is getting more and more challenging.
Mr Chair, that yes, there is a fair bit of red ink on it. None of it came as a real surprise to me. We know that our network is under pressure, and a lot of this is about journey time and variability in journey time, so that didn't come as a surprise. The death and serious injury graphs also have a lot of red on them, and that certainly is reflective of a national trend. Our deaths and serious injury are going in the wrong way across the whole country. I wasn't particularly surprised, remembering that this is the 17-18 report. I will be looking with interest to see what the 18-19 one is telling us, because there have been some changes, particularly around public transport, and we have a travel demand management person who has come onto staff in the last 8 months, which may make a difference. We'll be interested to see.
Councillor Noonan?
Mr Chair, I just wonder who sets the targets?
Mr Chair, the targets are set through this committee, through the Regional Land Transport Plan.
And when do we do it next?
So you'll be getting the 18-19 data at the next RTC committee. So we're gathering that data now to bring back to you.
Okay. I think I read somewhere, it was a while ago I read this, that we were going to change the targets because some of them aren't actually able to be achieved. So are we going to be a bit more realistic about setting the targets with a little bit of a stretch, but, you know?
So that would be a conversation for our next RTC meeting. Plan.
So RLTP.
RLTP plan.
Yeah, I think.
And the last question really is just regarding cycling and walking. Do you think we've got everybody on bikes that we can get on bikes, or do you think there's still a bit more flexibility there?
Through the Chair, I think there is still room for growth there. So we still have some gaps in our cycling network, and those interested but concerned cyclists are not yet on their bikes.
Right.
There is a large uptake of e-bikes, which is bringing new people in. We know that year on year our cycling counts are increasing, but it's starting in the recreational space, so they're not yet transferring into commuting to and from work, and that's where we're hopeful that our travel demand management person, our resource and our workplace travel plans may make an impact.
Right, so through the Chair, the work that we are doing on the network will sort of close that gap to get more people potentially on commuting bikes?
Through the Chair, that would be our hope, but we have a fairly obvious gap, and that would be the Nelson waterfront, but certainly the Tahuna Nui work is heading in the right direction. Stage 2 of that funding has been approved, so we'll hope to see the benefits of that in due course.
Right, thank you.
I had similar questions or comments to Councillor Noonan, because I noticed on page 53 the walking and cycling count data, 6 sites, 7% over target, good result, moving up. But then on page 51, top right there, the target of 25% of people either walking, cycling or catching a bus to work, and that's been going completely the other way. So it would appear to be either a data problem or we've got quite a lot of work to do, because we know the single occupant vehicles peak time is the biggest challenge we've got, and it's great to do recreation cycling as a precursor, but there's obviously some work to be done.
On that subject, I see the census data and residence surveys, the way of checking that, which doesn't appear to be the most robust way of.
So through the Chair, we have looked at the resident survey question quite closely this year, because we were concerned that the wording in it was around how they travelled to work that day, and being mindful that this survey is held in the middle of winter, which may not help our data. So the census data, for the most recent we have is 2013, and we're not going to get the 17 data until March next year. So we work with what we have, but in as I said earlier, the graph on page 53 is around cycling counts at our screen lines. The graph on page 52 is response to that, how did you get to work this week, or how do you get to work most often question. So they are two separate things.
Page 48, if I could turn your attention there. I was just struggling to line up what looks like a result that should be quite negative, so it's travel time increasing to Q1 2018, but then the result is, the change is in green. Should that change be in red?
Mr Chair, the colour is in relation to the variability, so it's not about the duration of the trip, it's about how predictable the journey time is. So we can predict that, that it's going to take you longer.
Understood. Reliably a bad result. Does anyone have any further questions? Thank you, and seconded by Mr. Harland. Okay, I'll put that we received the report. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Okay, sorry, next. Right, back to Steve for the variation report. Item 12, page 62.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just very quickly, this variation has come from the Safe Networks program. So it's a national program that NZTA has been developing. It's been approved, it was approved by the board in November last year. And as a result of that approval, it is now looking to get variations into all of the regional land transport plans, because in order to unlock that money, of course, it's got to be in a regional land transport plan in order to do that. The program itself, so this part of the program is to implement the speed management guide, which is essentially looking at the data that we currently have at the moment and targeting that data to the top 5 to 10% of the most risk roads around New Zealand. On top of that, it is also looking to systematically target the highest risk regions, which is Auckland, Waikato and Canterbury, and over the next 2 to 3 years target all of the regions around New Zealand with Nelson, Tasman and Marlborough in year 3. So this variation really is looking at the main part of the program, but as we talked about earlier before, some of it has been accelerated, including the State Highway 6 that we talked at an earlier version. So what we're after is a variation to the Regional Land Transport Plan. The figure there is $1.2 million. And that is to implement the speed management guide throughout Nelson during that period.
Can you just enlighten us a bit further about what the speed management guide is and what implementation of it looks like?
You okay? So the speed management guide was put out in 2016 as a way of ensuring that we have a consistent one network approach right across New Zealand, and to ensure we have particularly consistency across our urban and rural networks alongside the state highway network. So the plan itself the guide itself is dedicated to using an algorithm through Mega Maps as a point to start that conversation. There's been a lot of conversation around the integrity of Mega Maps, but what's really important not to get lost on is it is the beginning of that conversation, and that local knowledge is integral to ensuring that we get the right speeds in the right locations. So that's the speed management guide.
Yeah, it might just be worth if you could outline the key factors that go into Mega Maps. That might help committee members understand what the tool is.
I can't do the specific ones yet. You might be better at that than I am.
Well, it takes into account the current speed, takes into account topography, takes into account condition of the road itself, takes into account traffic volumes. It takes into account a Kiwi Wrap rating, which is, are there barriers there and all sorts of things. So it takes a number of factors and puts them into an algorithm and then says, well, for this particular part of the network, given all of that, this is an ideal speed. So for parts of Cambridge to Auckland, it comes up with 100 or 110 k's. For a lot of rural New Zealand, it's 70 or 80 at best, because if you make a mistake, there's no barriers no nothing. So it takes that, and that's why it then plots out what an ideal or a proposed ideal speed would be using those inputs. But like any model, that's what it is. It's a mega maps tool modelling those factors, gives some suggested speeds, and as Janine says, then you start ground truthing that in the real world, looking at consistency between sections, how do drivers behave, what are you currently measuring for speeds, and so on and so forth.
Okay, so the 1.2 million, that does the computer modelling, it does the ground truthing, and then it does any actual implementation of recommended changes.
That's right. Bear in mind that it is actually the full package basically to get to a point where you are looking at changing speed. A big part of that, of course, is community consultation. You've got to have the community on board with you, and they've got to understand what it is that you're doing, and that's quite a large component of it as well as the analytical stuff at the start.
Councillor Matheson?
So, thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Steve, if, for example, I see we're in year 3, if for some reason we felt that, a bit like Atawhai, we felt that that particular piece of road was causing all sorts of problems for us, can we come to you and accelerate the ability to be able to look at it? In other words, say, look, there's a whole lot of crash stats here, there's all bits and pieces happening for whatever reason. Would you consider it then, if there's a case to answer?
I think if there is a case we could, but of course there is a program that's rolling out nationally.
Yeah.
And of course there is a tight funding regime that we're actually working within too. So within those constraints we could look at it, but the reason why they've done it this way is they've actually looked at the risk at a national level, and then of course at each of the regional levels as well.
Yeah.
And so we're sort of trying to go through a sort of
a process which you've got managed, but I'm just saying there may be a case somewhere along the line between now and the next period of time where you probably need to stop and do a consideration. But we can come to you with that if we feel right. Yep.
I'm happy to move it, given it's NZTA are paying for it. It has no impact on rates. I have pleasure in moving.
And seconded by Jim, thank you. Just before we speak to a debate or vote, okay, understood, thank you. One more time, is this on a different track than the noise reduction project? Or does this have a big caveat that we're putting the money in provisionally, but this could all just stop?
So I can't give you an absolute unequivocal answer that the money will flow, as it were. It's with anything, the first starting point is get it into the Regional Land Transport Plan, so then it can be considered as a project in the National Land Transport Plan. It will still need to go through a business case, it will still need to stack up. But given the way that the National Land Transport Plan and the GPS are structured, particularly around safety and the government's focus around safety, we would expect that this work will come up with a very strong strategic alignment. So it should profile very well. There is work that we need to go through in order to actually justify, the benefits and the costs, and focusing, what parts of the network we will focus on. So, I mean, with those sort of caveats, and the fact that the board has approved the program nationally, there is certainly some strong there's some strong push behind this program to get it completed.
Okay, thank you. So I guess the key learning from me is that been recently that despite a project being requested by NZTA to be put in, it actually doesn't put it in any necessarily stronger footing than if it had just come through the RLTP. And it does seem a slight peculiarity in the system that maybe that could be an improvement for the the planning process is if NZTA say, can you please put this project in your RLTP, that there should be some certainty that the funding is going to be available, but that's probably a bigger question.
Well, it is, and I guess it's a curiosity of the funding process, but the key point is at the bottom of page 67. We iterate that inclusion in the RLTP is the first step in the process to access funding from the National Land Transport Fund. So in essence in there, we can't do the work to be able to determine what the project is to then put the bid up. So without that first step, which is pre-implementation, then we can't even get started, and we can't treat ourselves more generous. Oh, it's an NZTA 100%, therefore it's fine, it goes straight to funding. Well, no, it's got to be assessed in exactly the same way.
So Jim, given the early stage of the project and you haven't done a business case, how do you get to $1.26 million? And I guess that's what we saw with the road surfacing, is you were down to number of metres and down to nearest $10,000. It seemed rather specific.
My understanding is on these ones, they've allowed a certain amount for consultation. So it's the same sort of figure pretty well across New Zealand and other bits and pieces. So they've got a formula. So whether it is exactly 1.26 when implied here will depend on what happens. But there has been some methodology behind it, I'm advised.
Who was the seconder?
Jim. So it's been moved by Councillor Noonan, second by Mr. Harland. Anyone wish to debate? No, I'll put that. All those in favour, aye. Against, carried. Thank you, guys. Right.
I'll move we go into public excluded.
Moving to public excluded, and we just have to note that Mr. Steve Higgs will be remaining behind to answer questions, and accordingly the following resolution is posed. So you're happy to move it? You're happy to second? All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Right. We are now in public excluded. Thank you all for attending.